Hello and welcome to Push Your Glasses Up. I'm Mikey. Today we're joined by Reena, our old co-host and, constantly returning friend, to talk about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, this end of the trilogy, plus what with them being in, the other movies like Infinity War, Endgame, and also the holiday special. So it's more than just the trilogy. Hey, real quick before we get into the thick of it, if you enjoy these videos, please like them, subscribe to the channel. It helps out a great deal. It helps people discover it a little bit more. And also, if you prefer these kinds of long form things in audio only format, you can find us on most podcast services, your Spotify's, your Apple Podcasts and whatnot, but also some of your smaller ones like Player FM and all those ones. So keep an eye out there if you're more or an ear out, I guess, if you're interested in doing it that way. Let's just talk about Guardians now. Reena, hi.
Hi, Mikey. What's up?
I'm tired.
Yeah, me too, but at least it was nice out.
I wouldn't know. I was working with the window shades closed all day.
I was in the garden, which is why I look like a country bumpkin, but that's fine.
Yeah, no, as of taping this, it is the weekend, so I finished my work shift like an hour before we were doing this. So I'm just a little bit sleepy from looking at the computer screen all day. But these things happen. What did you think about this here third Guardians of the Galaxy movie? Although there's more than just the three movies, but whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because you've been doing cram sesh for like maybe a little over a year and a half now, but we actually have seen all these movies and talked about them together, the previous two. So I feel like this is a natural conclusion for us for this trilogy. But this was a lot. It was a lot. And it might be because I have become a more emotional person over the last 3 years, but it's the first time I almost openly sobbed in a theater. And me, and for people who have listened to us over the years, we know that is not a thing.
Yeah, we should establish only a little bit more emotional than you used to be.
A different kind of emotional.
Yeah, you went from ice cold to iced tea on a summer day. Like that. Yes. Yeah. This movie, like the other two, definitely got me while I was in the theater crying in the club. It kind of carries a different weight to it though, as opposed to the other ones. This is, there's mom stuff in the first one and dad stuff in the second one, and this one it doesn't. It doesn't. Yeah, that's the thing, is it doesn't not have those things, but the biggest focus on this of this movie is Rocket's storyline, and it is all about the mistreatment of animals, and it is hard to watch some of this. I do legitimately, I think this is the closest we've probably ever gotten to recapturing what it was like experiencing movies as kids in the 80s. With
yep.
With
why we all are in therapy now.
Yeah, above the line, yeah, this is PG because of when it came out, but this is not a PG movie kind of thing. I mean, this is PG-13, but just for the establishing of what I was trying to get across there. But yeah, it's a hard one to watch. It's probably,
I can't watch it again. I'm not gonna be able to watch it again. Okay, but for me personally,
context,
again,
you should probably add the context on top of everything else. Animal cruelty, hard to watch in general, but you have extra context.
Extra context, as my 15-year-old French bulldog, I put into a metal apparatus with wheels so she can get around every day. So Teefs and Lila and Floor just resonate a little bit more to me, maybe because I'm literally looking at obviously she's not a victim of cruelty, she's just a victim of age. But it just, I watch her struggle every day, and that's hard as it is. So I'm already on a different emotional level. And then seeing people just be cruel and having to see what happens to them, or even what happens to baby Rocket, is a lot. Also, my mom is borderline militant vegan. So, yeah, so that's kind of been instilled in me. And yeah, it was a lot. I actually was trying not to cry when I got out of the theater, and I was like leveled for like the rest of the night. Yeah. I was like not okay after watching that. I have to be, I feel like it may have, given it was Rocket's backstory, I almost felt it was a little too much. I would have liked to see more of what happened when he escaped. I would have liked to see maybe how he met Groot and like a little bit more of his story. Except it was very centered on this part.
I think with the way that he is set up in the first movie, they needed to do what they needed to do in this movie for that. Fortunately, unfortunately, because it is like, for those reasons, like it is going to be hard, if not impossible, for some people to watch that stuff happen, right? So, but I think that the way that they set him up when they're going into the prison in the first movie and Quill sees the augments on his spine as they're getting dressed after being like forcibly showered and stuff. I think that for the full circle of everything, especially since like they do full circle on everybody in this movie. Everybody gets at least a moment of like needing to become who they've always needed to become. And
or at least being put on the path to that.
Exactly. Yeah. And especially with the fact that James Gunn for a long time has said that Rocket is actually the protagonist of these movies. I think that we did need to actually explore the harder aspects of his origin, because it is like, it's a hard thing to watch, but I think James Gunn, being the animal lover that he is, wanted to make sure that people knew this was going to be a hard thing to watch in terms of not like ahead of time. I just mean like really hammering home the point. And that's something that James Gunn does on multiple fronts, right? He does that on emotional level things, but he also does that on like jokes. He hammers jokes until they maybe are not funny anymore. And on action sequences, he goes balls to the walls until there's a natural conclusion typically. And that is something that he just needs to translate through how he makes stuff. And so I do think for this story, whether or not that's going to be everybody's cup of tea, I think it is kind of necessary to have experienced it. Could it have been a little less harsh on some of it? For sure. But I think we needed to see the fact that Rocket this whole time has been dealing with survivor's guilt and blaming himself for a lot of things. I think we needed to see why. And if we just focused on him meeting Groot, which would be its own great story, and I think that they could do that as sort of like flashbacks on a Disney Plus show or something, I don't know if that would have done justice to completing that story.
I almost wish they peppered in some of it like throughout some of the other films too, because I'm thinking back to I think it's Infinity War, when he and Nebula, or maybe it's Endgame, when him and Nebula are the only ones left.
Right.
So it's like the second time he's lost his chosen family.
Right.
Right. And now we have the context of why that was so hard. But I almost wish like we kind of knew that along the way, or that we knew that the High Evolutionary was trying to get him back.
You mean like knowing that the High Evolutionary was trying to get him back, like since the beginning of the movies, you mean?
Yeah. Like that,
Gotcha.
Like he was kind of on the run because he is technically intellectual property.
Sure. Yeah, I could see that. I don't know if that's necessarily how
I just didn't feel prepared. I didn't feel prepared.
I don't know if it was always in the plan for the High Evolutionary to, like, it was always in the plan to explore Rocket's origin. I don't know if that character was always in the plan though, so I don't know if that would have been able to work out or whatever. But
as a counterpoint to my own point, he was kind of lame.
You mean bad?
The High Evolution.
You don't think he was a good villain? I thought he was honestly one of the best villains in the fucking MCU.
Oh my god.
And it's in the performance. It's in the performance. The performance is very good.
I felt like he was like I felt like he was like Elon Musk meets Dr. Moreau.
I mean, he's Hitler. he's a eugenicist. So he is like literally like, it's just an over the top psychopath that's trying to make a pure species. So they went like chew the scenery with him because since he's based on a character that is like over the top character, a person who was like drop of a hat, just psychopath, and then pretending to be calm in front of other people. And like, so I think that was actually like a very, very well done thing that they did for this. So we'll have to disagree on that. But yeah, I just think that this like, it's a weird series to think about because we have to deal with like the Infinity War of it and the Endgame of it, which those characters feel different in those movies because it's not James Gunn handling them. And so like even before the dusting happens and Quill is there, like Quill doesn't feel like Quill because the words that are being written and he's speaking are just not Gunn's voice coming through, right? So I almost have to disassociate those things and only look at 1, 2 holiday special and 3 as far as like judging how I would place this series. Like I'm including the holiday special, but like it's a trilogy. And honestly, like what are the best trilogies? Like Thor Love and Thunder doesn't count because it's a 4th movie, but like what would you say are the best trilogies in the MCU?
Captain America.
Right. And then Spider-Man.
Yeah, Spider-Man. Those would probably be like my top 2.
I think this has now surpassed those because I think because of the stability in the creative side of it, I think that there is a line of vision that flows properly. And it's not like with Spider-Man. This is me we're talking about. Like, I love Spider-Man in all fashions. But I think Far From Home has that little bit of a dip where like, and on top of that, just it's about Peter in this MCU version, and it never feels like his own thing. So like, I love that trilogy of movies, but like it never feels like a Tom Holland Spider-Man trilogy.
More like it's like a wave, like a dip, but ends on a high.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And then I feel like we have a different situation with Captain America where every movie feels different. And I think I have always more than most people loved the first Captain America, like because it's that throwback Rocketeer vibe. I adore that, and I adore the Winter Soldier. I think that Captain America Civil War is a really great Avengers side movie. But it's not a Captain America movie to me. So like, I think that because of those things where like something happens in both of those trilogies where I'm like, one of these movies doesn't feel like it's their movie anymore. This one keeps that like steady line going across the whole time. And so I think that for me, this is the best trilogy in the MCU now, just because it rounds out the stories better than everybody else in terms of like a 1, 2, and 3. Everyone gets a good conclusion, as opposed to like Captain America is just like kind of like this, and it requires Endgame.
I mean, there's also, it covers more time, right? So I don't mind differences in the movies because they're going, I mean, I feel like Winter Soldier and Civil War are closer, but the first one obviously is like Man Out of Time. So there's like Captain America's much older, there's a lot bigger space to cover.
But it also it also like yes, we lose Gamora Prime in Infinity War, but that's really like the only part of Infinity War that matters to the Guardians, as opposed to like with Captain America and Spider-Man and Iron Man, like all these other series that have had trilogies or more. Those are requisite. Those are like hardcore requisite because of the fact that like with Infinity War and Endgame, especially, like that main squad of the Avengers is the main squad of those movies. So like, yes, Rocket and Nebula are in Endgame for the whole runtime technically, but like it's not quite the same as like those main Avengers being into it. So it's like, to me, I can kind of remove myself, even though that Gamora thing happens, and I think it kind of.
I mean, that's kind of important.
No, it is. It is important. I think it hamstrung James Gunn though, because that's not his choice to do that with that character, and I think it caused him to have an issue in this movie. But like,
but I feel like we got some of the best Nebula stuff in terms of character development from what happened there, because the Nebula we see is like the result of like everything that happens in Volume 2, everything that happened in Infinity War and Endgame, and then like coming out the other side of it. And I feel like she at least has become a more well-rounded character through the MCU arc.
Yeah, I do. I think what you're saying is definitely true about after Volume 2. I personally don't think that much of what happened in Infinity War or Endgame would have changed the trajectory of how that character came out the other end of Volume 2. Like, they parted ways at the end of Volume 2 in a place where they had already started that reconciliation, and then all that Infinity War and Endgame did was rip that away. And so like but I feel like
she wanted to, then she realized the importance of being part of the team, and that, you know, because she was on her own before that, and like she made her peace, you know, with Gamora, but the, you know, spending time with Rocket, you know, when she was left over after the snap, like I don't know, I feel like that added to her character arc, and we see like more of a leadership role. We see a lot more of her being part of the team and taking the lead when Peter can't. So, you know, I feel like those things contributed.
I'm not saying they didn't contribute. I just don't think that it's as requisite when considering like the overall story in the franchise for the characters. I think that you could look at this trilogy and like from the holiday special understand what's going on, as opposed to if you were to show somebody all the Captain America stuff. And
well, you're asking me what trilogies are like. I mean, I'm not the one comparing it to Captain America.
But that's what I mean.
It's a totally different vibe. It's a totally different vibe than these.
Well, no, but that's what I'm saying is I think that you need to watch 17 movies to get Captain America's story. So I think that that's a weaker trilogy because of that.
As opposed to
that's what it is. That's all I'm trying to get at.
Okay.
So like, and the same thing goes with Spider-Man. Like you need the Endgame and Infinity War aspects for No Way Home to hit as much as it does, I think. So like, It's just this thing where I don't know how many people would feel the same way that I do about that, but I just think it wound up coming out as like the strongest sub-series of the MCU in terms of stability that way, where you can just look at it and be like, these couple of movies, I don't even have to watch the rest of the Marvel universe for the most part. But yeah.
You might not get a couple references, but yeah, no, that makes total sense.
And then they get filled in, which is like where it helps.
And they were able to plug, but you know, that's kind of like the brilliance of it, is that this can be a self-contained trilogy, but then those characters very easily plug into the larger MCU where needed.
Yeah. And that's mostly where I was just trying to get to, where it's like requisite versus like I could just watch these 3 movies now. It makes it easy. But yeah, what else?
Maybe we should talk about, like, now this is like the completion and everyone's kind of gone through a journey. Let's kind of talk about where the characters like ended up and like what we think about. Like, why don't we like just break down the squad?
I legitimately think every member of the Guardians, it came out in the organic place for them, where Rocket took over as captain of the Guardians and Groot is now his number 2. Does
he just keep growing? I want like more information on Groot every time I see
so
him.
that's the thing, is this Groot is not the Groot from the first movie. This is his son. So it is a like different thing where it's like the Groot that we saw in that movie, we don't know if he was fully grown in the first movie or not, or if he was supposed to keep growing from where he was.
He's his, like, baby Groot was his son?
Yes.
He didn't just get a do-over?
That is canonically how it is via James Gunn. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and that's why all of the Guardians take him in the way that they do, because they have adopted their friend's son, as opposed to just like, oh, we have to re-raise our friend. That's why like the end of 2 hits so well, I think, for me, because it is literally they are circling the wagons around their friend's orphaned kid.
Their friend. Volume 2 is when he's like a shitty teenager, though, isn't it?
No, Volume 2 is Baby Groot. The end of Volume 2 in the post credits.
My God.
In one of the 5 post credits.
I love Baby Groot so much. I love the little shorts that they did on Disney Plus too. If you haven't watched those, you should go watch them. Not you, but like if anyone listening hasn't gone and watched them.
The royal
I felt
you.
like there was some element of that too in this Groot a little bit.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is like the personalities are different, right? So like it obviously, it's like you could write it off as like it's just an infantized version of Groot, because Groot had that sort of innocence to him in the first movie. But like there is a personality difference between the two. And so this one feels more in line with Volume 2 than it would have Volume 1. Yeah. But I think that that pairing came out exactly where they needed to be. I think Mantis needing to go her own way after living her entire life as Ego's sleeping pill, basically. And then it's the sort of relationship to relationship kind of thing where she never had a chance to find herself and be who she chooses to be. And so I think that the same thing goes for that, where it's like she needs to take time, and that doesn't mean she can't come back and be with them again, but like she needs to take time and find who Mantis is for Mantis.
Yeah, no, that made sense. And now she has a bunch of pets as well, so that was adorable.
Which is, it's a little funny. Like I guess that was just for the sake of being a callback to the last movie, or to Volume 2, with what kind of creatures they were, instead of being a new kind of creature. But that's, whatever. I think maybe the most beautiful full circle thing is Drax.
I gotta be real. I thought he was going to eat it. I thought that was going to be the end for some reason. Like, did you go into this expecting someone to die? Because I kind of went into this expecting someone to die. You
don't put the shot of Chris Pratt like screaming over a hospital bed, basically, if you're not trying to make people think like somebody's gonna eat it. But yeah, his whole story being about trying to reconcile the loss of his wife and daughter, to have him get to a place in this where he is very naturally just like, there's kids here, so I am going to just act the way that I acted with my daughter. Like, it is so beautifully done. And like, I feel like every time we talk about Dave Bautista as an actor, it comes across as like still surprising at how good he is. That started with the first movie in the series. And I think the conversation never moved on to just knowing that he's that good. And it, like, I swear to God, if this conversation continues after this movie, after these moments where he's with the kids in this at the end, I am going to lose my shit. Because it's like, he's clearly good. He's clearly, well, no, not the wrestling. I just mean, like, he's just a good actor.
But I thought that was part of it, is like, we kind of talk about, you know, wrestlers be like going into acting and they're kind of like usually one note, but like, he is a fantastic dramatic actor. And now I don't even think of that correlation at all. He's just an actor to me.
Drama and comedy. Yeah. Like he's, and that's the thing is, like, in this movie, I think the comedy is there, but it's a little toned down versus the last movie. I think the last movie is where James Gunn had the most, like, I'm just going to go for it on some of this stuff.
Well, also, they gave him a friend, right? Like, Mantis is his bestie.
Yeah.
Like, and I feel like that relationship really brought his character to a different level, because she's the first one to truly understand what he went through. Yeah. And we see that in volume 2. And that kind of bonded them. Yeah. And so it's kind of been since the holiday special, like the two of them. And I think that helped round out his character quite a bit.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's just, I mean, I don't know what else to say, or what else there is to say about it besides, like, it's like everyone ends up where they need to end up in this movie, but that one is my favorite one by far. It's not my favorite necessarily overall story in this movie. I think Rockets is my favorite one overall, but I think for the overarching stories of the whole series, Drax is just done in such a really nice way in this. I
feel like Rocket didn't even get to steal anything, like, arbitrarily this time. That's kind of a bummer.
Well, you notice the things he stole through the whole series were prosthetics. I mean, he stole batteries too, but like, a lot of the stealing that he did through the series were prosthetics, and that is one of the associating. But he did steal stuff in this movie. It's just when he was a baby. Yes. Because he stole all the parts that allowed him to make the key card. So, but yeah, with Gamora, I think James Gunn did about as good as he could. I
like this Gamora. I liked her with the Ravagers. I liked her, you know, with when, like, she came back to them at the end, and they're like, you know, I felt like she had her place.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that's now her found family for her, but like, we don't know her is the thing. So it's like, as far as on the audience side, it's just not as emotionally connected to it as if it were still the Gamora that we had known for such a long time. And I think that James Gunn, like I said, did the best that he could with it and did a perfectly fine job with it. But it does make it a little hard to convey that, like, final moment for that character, because it's a character that we haven't known at all. So yeah. And then there's Peter, who you know, it's the easiest one to write, where he has to go back home. The whole series starts with him running away from his family, and continues on to him constantly running from his family. And so it was all about returning home in a way. I mean, all of these characters, in a way, you could say it's about returning home to get where they needed to resolve things in this. With Rocket, he literally needed to go and, like, destroy his father in a way. And then, you know, it's an interesting thing to look at this series of, you know, 3 movies plus whatever, and it's all about this ragtag group of misfits who have a hard time fitting together at first, but they're all from disparate parts of the universe. But it all just kind of boils down to home in the end.
Well, that's kind of what Nowhere also became, right? Like, as they had like a home base, and like, you know, in addition to them, we've also seen cameos from like, you know, people, we have side characters or cameos across the other 2 volumes, which I think was also really nice for like the final movie. And I'm really happy that Cosmo got so much screen time.
Yes.
She's a good dog. She's a good dog.
I liked that B plot for comedy's sake to bounce everything else. You know, you have a little bit of levity on the other side. I do wish Kraglin had a little bit more of a moment than he had at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Not that that moment wasn't good, but because the rest of his part of the movie was just him with Cosmo having that back and forth, I wish we saw a little more of him like dealing with the arrow stuff as opposed to just like dealing with the arrow stuff and then it leads to the running joke of bad dog over and over and over again. Which it pays off. It pays off fine. But I just think that like the way that volume 2 ends for Kraglin is a really emotional moment when the Ravager funeral is happening for Yondu and he's like screaming in celebration that it's happening. I wanted to feel that moment again for him to like have that big of a thing. And just because of how the rest of the movie goes for him.
But I liked when he saw Yondu and he was like, when he finally figured out how to use the arrow. Yeah,
I just wish there was more build up through the movie for that is all. Because that was all fun with Cosmo, which doesn't showcase the struggle to get to the point where he finally uses the arrow correctly. So it's, you know, I think it's fine. I just wish it was a little more impactful. That's all. One
person we haven't talked about any of the new. Yeah, I was like, we haven't talked about the biggest new character that was highly anticipated.
How did you feel about them going 6-year-old with him?
I mean, I thought it was fun. You know, I didn't. If he was like full power, what would be, and he was coming after them, like what would be the point of also having a villain? That's like a lot of, I think it would have taken the focus off, right? Because if he was already very, very powerful, but if they took a more serious tone, I think that would have been a hard balance.
Yeah.
So I thought it was fun that they kind of made him a little bit like dopey because he wasn't done baking. And it's fine because I'm waiting to see what James Gunn does with Superman anyway.
Yeah.
Oh, this is something I wanted to ask you. So Matthew and I are having this conversation about capes. And Adam Warlock made me think of this. And I feel like DC loves a cape. Loves a cape. Everyone gets a cape. Like the Oprah of capes. Look under your seat, you get a cape. For Marvel, I feel like you only get a cape, with some exceptions, if you are a magic user or you have the power of flight. I feel like other than that, and I'm talking like comic book too. For instance, Scarlet Witch doesn't have a cape in the MCU, but she does in the comic books.
Yeah, it's a weird one.
Cape rules.
It's a weird one because like the capes, even Batman, even though he doesn't fly, like he does a lot of aerial stuff. So I think generally speaking, capes, even on DC side, still have that requisite of like, you need to be doing something in the air to make it look like a reason for a cape to be there. But yeah, it's with Marvel, they're just a little more few and far between because of the eras, I think, of when these characters came to be.
Yeah, that's what Matthew was saying too.
Because the majority of them, like the oldest ones are going to be like Captain America. It wouldn't make sense for him to have a cape. He's a soldier. He's wearing a soldier's uniform. Then you have like Namor, and he just wears a Speedo. So that would be weird. But like,
and like, yeah, that's like, and like Captain Marvel was another example, but she is also like, you know, in the MCU, she's ex-military and there's like a lot going on. But like, did Miss Marvel like?
No, Miss Marvel had a sash. And I'm talking about when it was Carol, Miss Marvel.
Yeah, I'm talking about Carol.
And then it transfers into like a more culturally effective one for Kamala. But like it's an interesting discussion, I guess, but I think it's just more that most of the Marvel stuff is coming out of the 60s and capes probably felt kind of old fashioned. And so once it kind of hit like into the 80s and 90s is where you started to see a little bit more of them come back. You have your like Storm, where it's not really like a cape, but it's like it's attached to the thumbs and then it like scoops back onto her back and stuff. But I think it is just a differentiating factor, and it's due to when Marvel really picked up. I mean, it's a weird thing because it's also like there's with the idea of a cape comes grandeur. And I think the whole point of Marvel is, for the most part, I mean, you can have your discussions about like the X-Men and how some of them believe them to be more like gods and whatever, but like Magneto had a cape and he believed he was like a god. So
Thor is a god. He has a cape.
Yes. Sentry is basically the Marvel stand-in for Superman and has a cape. So like
Doctor Strange has a cape because that his ego.
Well, he doesn't. One. He has a cloak.
Well, okay, he has a cloak, and it is a living being.
Yeah. So that one might be a little bit tougher to pin down, but no, but yeah, I was gonna say about Adam Warlock, like they went fairly accurate to the naivete of the character. They just chose to make that naivete into a child's naivete instead of like an adult who is like purely dumb. Because I love the way that they handled Aisha, and not necessarily the way that she was taken out in the movie, but like the way that they handled her as the mom character. And she's like, in volume 2, it starts out as she's like very put together and like the straight lines of her hair. And in this movie, she's just tired mom. And I really liked that. I thought that was a really funny way to go with it. It could have gone multiple different ways, but I like the idea of like she is bringing up Adam as her son, and so like she's just tired mom. She's a little disheveled on the way to the supermarket, like completely realistic. I
almost wish we saw a little bit more of the Sovereign, just as a little more of like a tie-in, maybe like just a flash, just to kind of recap that. But there were also, we were introduced to new civilizations as well. Yeah,
like I think that I get what you're saying. I think that they probably didn't need to, because they needed to introduce the fact that this was a cycle of creating the perfect race and then raising them to the ground, and then creating the perfect race and raising to the ground. And I think that they just needed to get to those other civilizations to show that he's continually doing this. And I think they did enough where the point of Adam in this movie was to get Rocket back so that the Sovereign could be saved from the High Evolutionary raising them, as proof of like, no, we did it. We got to the point that you wanted us to be. But obviously Adam's a dum-dum, so it wouldn't have worked out anyway. But
I mean, would it have, or it kind of seemed like nothing was ever good enough?
Well, that's that's the end game. But that's the end game of that whole thing, is like he's always going to it's somebody that has a superiority complex who has been bested by one person, and that is Rocket. And so no matter what, every civilization, until he discovers why Rocket worked, is not going to match up, because it needs to, the perfect civilization has to be in his form. It has to be matching him, but he always knows that Rocket outmatched him in discovering that flaw in the system of why the mutation stuff wasn't working, like the accelerated evolution.
Did it make
stuff.
you think of Ninja Turtles for like a hot second? Like
It weirdly didn't. Like, I know I'm the Ninja Turtles guy, but like
I felt Secret of the Ooze for like a hot second.
Because I had been ingrained to already know the humanimals and stuff were in this movie, it allowed me to disassociate with that. I'm sure if I knew nothing about this movie going in, that probably would have been the case. I would have immediately thought of Ninja Turtles and stuff, but like for some reason it just didn't until I saw somebody talking about the movie on a review after I already watched it, and I was like, yeah, I guess like, that's fine. But like, you know, there's like sheep people and all this other stuff. So I was like,
well, it was just in the one scene where they figure out the problem and they
yeah. But like, because of the trailers showing us all these other creatures, I went in going, oh no, this is just these group of people. So it like completely shut anything out from my brain, even though I am that Ninja Turtles guy, you know. But yeah, I keep going back to this whole thing about like this as a series of like, a standalone trilogy or whatever. Because it's interesting to look at the trajectory of these movies. The first movie, as great as it is both the weakest one in the trilogy in terms of like the exploration of character.
Oh, that's my favorite one.
And that's the thing, is it's the most fun one.
That's one of my favorite Marvel movies.
Yeah.
Like, I'd put that first one way up there.
For sure. I'm not saying that that's not the case, but it's just weird when you like to dissect them on like a film study kind of way. This is the perfect end cap movie to a trilogy. I think this is like hands down the best way you could go out. Like, this is their kind of farewell moment.
It felt like when, BTS announced their hiatus, like they're all going to do their own thing, but it may not mean forever.
There will be people, I'm sure, that know exactly what you're talking about that are listening.
Just like a
That's
little,
fine.
related back to K-pop, but
But like, I think the first movie is like, that's the one that's like the most overt fun space adventure movie. That's the one where the gang gets together. That's the one where they have more of like the spaceship battle stuff going on. Like,
and there was no expectation because nobody thought about the Guardians before that.
And so
they were like side characters.
It leaves more of that mark because of that, blank slate moment to make an impact. I think the second movie does a better job of exploring the characters and letting them grow and letting them relate to one another. And so, like, technically speaking, I think 2 is better than 1 in that way. And I think 3 is better than 2 in that way because it brings all that stuff full circle. But it's so strange because, like, I know you said you're not going to revisit this movie maybe ever.
I'll have to do like a
when you do like a big rewatch or whatever,
or like I may have to do like a super cut, and just I know like
without the flashbacks,
just move through there. Is there like a PG version that I can watch?
But I'll revisit this movie, but it's the one I'll probably revisit the least, even though I think it's like when it all comes down and you look at things evenly, I think technically this is the best movie that they've put together in terms of like completion. And even though I think 2 is technically a better movie than 1, because it finally allows those moments with Gamora and Nebula to like have that heart to heart with one another, to have the stuff with Peter realizing like he doesn't need his father, and in that final face down, like the face off joke in the third movie
your
is
father
very
is
funny.
and who raised you don't have to be the same
because the stuff with
person.
Yondu in that movie is lovely.
That's the best part. The best part.
And what's funny is like with that stuff with Yondu is like when Peter is facing off with Ego in that movie, A thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is there's more meaning to Peter taking the form of Pac-Man than I think they realize. And it's that, like, yes, he makes a reference to a Pac-Man statue earlier. That's whatever. He's taking so Ego takes the form of the ideal idea of what Peter wanted for a father. He's that like coiffed 70s guy, like the David Hasselhoff, if you will. But Peter takes the form of what his dad is, and it's a sphere with a face on it. And I just think that moment is like subtly very good while being audaciously garish at the same time in the pop culture reference. So I think that like that stuff is just outstanding. And I think that's where it like tops even that aspect of the first film. But I think the first film is still like the most rewatchable. It is. It's the same thing with like Indiana Jones. Like Last Crusade, I think, is probably technically a better movie than Raiders. But I'm going to watch Raiders more often because it is that like impactful first one.
Oh, Temple of Doom is my favorite.
Yeah, I mean, it is a very fun movie. I will give you that. But like balance, balance. I think it's the least of those three. Listen, the bottom is Crystal Skull. We know that. That's fine. So we can always say we like one of the better ones. But yeah, just with this series, I think this is maybe like we look at Endgame as like the end of an era in the MCU. I think this might be more impactful of an end of an era to me than that.
That's a bold statement.
I'm not saying it's
that's a bold statement.
Well, I'm not saying it's not like I'm not saying Endgame isn't like an impactful thing. I'm just saying I think because of the meta side of this movie, having that extra kind of coating on top of everything else to do with like the story inside of it, I think that this is more, for me, impactful of a end point that I'm not going to dip out of Marvel or anything, but like if I chose to, this one feels like it would be a good time because this is when the final remnants of that early Marvel is leaving because James Gunn is going on to DC. So like even, you know, in the credits on this movie, it says like the legendary Star-Lord will return or whatever. But it's like, A, what does that mean? B, we know it's not going to be with James Gunn involved. So it's going to feel different. Just like I was talking about earlier with like these characters in Endgame and Infinity War, they feel different. So like it's that kind of thing where I'm like, it feels like it could be that moment if I chose to walk away from everything, I could. Whereas like the end of Endgame was just like new beginnings. I don't want to go anywhere. This is so that for me, it's just like it kind of puts a pin in things of like, this is the declaration point of like moving forward. This is the new era, even though it's like the middle of a phase or whatever. But yeah.
Yeah, this has been an interesting phase. I feel like they're doing things a lot differently.
Yeah, and part of that is, you know, and I stand by all the shows to a degree. I think they're, you know, some of them have some wishy-washy episodes, but overall, I think they've all been good and some of them great. You get that
with any TV show.
Yeah,
like, there's
exactly.
Always. I'm an anime fan. Do you know how much filler is in anime?
Yeah. But it's also, and that's the thing, is like filler in anime is what filler is, whereas what people think filler is in American television is a character focused episode. That's it. But like, whereas I just had this discussion recently on the show where it's like filler comes from anime having more episodes than issues of a manga, so it needed to create new episodes, right? But like everyone just says there's no plot now for, and then uses the term filler, and I'm like, no, it's a character episode.
Sometimes you want to sit with something for a little bit longer.
You need to care about the characters, or else the plot doesn't matter. Like you don't give a shit about it.
Not everything can be told in like a 2-second flashback.
Yeah. but like I think all of them have been good and some of them great. Like WandaVision's finale, I think had great moments in it, but I think like the fight scene stuff just felt what people like to say is generic Marvel, when the rest of the series was like really good character exploration. So like, you know, I think pivoting to that, you know, it's what they had to do because of the pandemic and the era of Bob Chapek being in charge and wanting to make everything about Disney Plus and whatever. But this movie, like, it didn't feel like this era of Marvel where, you know, everything is like a lot of stuff is done on the volume and a lot of stuff like it's not that era of Disney production. It felt like they were still using green screens. So they were actually like painting stuff in and out as opposed to just like having stuff going on in the background. Everything felt alive and living and breathing in these sets and in it. So it's just this thing where it's like they can recapture some of that for sure moving forward.
Well,
but
you actually just brought up a really good point, is that the Guardians movies, all of them, feel like so big and so vibrant and introduce so many places and characters and things, which I feel like is different than the rest of the MCU. Like if we're introduced to characters, it's probably someone we know or like a cameo or things like that. But there's so much going on. It almost is like, you know, like the Tokyo of the Marvel universe. There is lights and sounds and planets and people and spaceships and lasers and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like and then everything, but it all ties together. It's not chaotic. You know, even now we've come full circle. Now Nowhere has become a community that they've built, incorporating so many of these other characters that we've like seen along the way. So it's kind of interesting when you think about the full circle there too.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't know. I feel like I'm probably just going to ramble on and on about like, you know, I think that this movie is really well handled, and you know, the stuff that James Gunn had to go through in order to get this movie done is bullshit. And stupid right wingers need to shut the fuck up sometimes. And
it all worked out for him in the end, though.
It
really did.
It did.
Because then he got Suicide Squad, and I feel like that was the first step into now being the head of DC. So
right, yeah, for sure.
He came back better than ever.
And I'm crazy excited for that and to see his Superman in particular. But it's bittersweet at the same time, because that does mean like that is the main thing giving me this feeling of like transitioning into a new era.
Oh, but speaking of new eras and speaking of James Gunn, how did you feel about the musical cues in this one? Because that has been his thing that I feel like he really brought to these films. I
think that it doesn't hit quite as much as the other movies do, but they're all great songs and they all work in the scenes that they needed to. I think the connection with some of them is in lyrics that aren't necessarily like in the forefront of a scene. Like in the second movie they go through with Brandy, and they literally talk through the lyrics and stuff. And there's not really a ton of that in this movie. Like, yeah, you can say like we have a little bit of that at the beginning with Radiohead and whatnot, but it's like that's also creep and like kind of used a little too much in pop culture for the way that they used it this way. So
I like the version that they used.
Yeah.
And I also felt like it was good coming off the holiday special, which had Smashing Pumpkins.
Right. Yeah.
In that kind of 90s era.
Yeah. But it's just this thing where I'm like, yeah, it's all right. I like the hallway scene with BC Boys, I think is great. I think that maybe it could have even had a better Beastie Boys song in that moment for like the kind of impact scene that it is. You can't use Sabotage because it's used too much in an action sequence, but like I think Sabotage would have worked better in that scene. So it's this thing where I'm like, it's a great soundtrack. It's just not quite to the levels of the other two.
Florence and the Machine was a surprise. But having seen Florence and the Machine, I definitely felt like that would make you dance. That I have danced at a Florence and the Machine show, and that's my vibe, so I don't know.
And that album in particular, I would say.
That album is fantastic. But
yeah, you know, it's I wouldn't say it's the strongest part of the movie, but like it still works really well because James Gunn still is doing it with those songs in mind, so it still works. There is one song that he tweeted out the other day that didn't make it in. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but I do remember that when he first mentioned it, I was like, aha, weird. There's a lyric in that references Superman. So
maybe he was like, oh, too soon.
No, they couldn't get the rights for it, he said. So because it's tied up in some weird.
Work for
no.
For Disney, not get the rights to this.
It's because there's complicated rights. It's not because somebody wouldn't approve it. It's because it's one of those situations like Friday the 13th where like 6 people say they own the rights. So, yeah.
Okay. I was gonna say like if Disney can't get the rights to something, then like really?
Well, that's what's funny too is like it's Disney, but then also those Disney. Maybe the movie soundtracks don't do this and it's just the Parks music. The Parks music is released by Universal Music Group. So like Universal, who has Universal Studios, owns the rights to Disney's theme park music. It's not funny, but one of those like, that's kind of funny things. But yeah, did you have anything else about this before we say goodbye?
No, that was probably, I feel like a good wrap up. I just I want more Baby Groot, and I don't think that's gonna happen. But other than that, I feel like Baby Groot's been replaced by Grogu, and it's fine. I feel like you can only handle one cute thing at a time. Yeah,
I mean, that is something we didn't touch on is the post credit scene where like after this is something I think could have been better designed after the story that we just watched of animal cruelty.
Right? I was like, wait a second.
Why is Rocket suddenly just gonna kill a bunch of these creatures? Like, yes, they're attacking people, but like, you could have to fit the story better. But to fit
they have relocated them?
They could have also just had it been like robots or like it could have just been anything other than like sentient beings who are just doing what they naturally do. I don't know. That was a weird choice to me, but it's a post-credit scene, whatever. All right. Well, I guess that'll do it for us. Thanks for coming back and rounding out the Guardians almost quadrilogy.
Well, thanks for having me.
Cool. And until next time. Bye.